I hope that I can put a little reality on this thing. It's quite abstract, obviously. It appears to be something that might be way out into the future. However, Mr. LaRouche has proposed that we could put about 4 million people to work right away. I personally can relate to that. I kind of have a sense of urgency. I'm a builder. I've been a land developer. About 3 years ago, almost precisely in concert with Mr. LaRouche's forecast, the housing industry collapsed, and my company's collapsed along with that. And I haven't built a house or a subdivision or a project of any nature since that time. So this is pretty exciting for me. I haven't done a presentation for 3 years. So I might be a little rusty. But I've been the guy that has essentially, we've worked with what we call greenfield projects. And that just simply means you take a green field and you turn it into a community or a city from scratch. I guess we call it from scratch. So there's an inception of an idea somewhere. And we take a vision and we convert it into a concept. And my job has been to organize all the necessary conditions, the processes, the procedures, identify and hire the necessary engineers, planners, subcontractors, etc. And typically we work we build horizontally and vertically. We build infrastructures. So we would go initially in through a planning process. We would rezone a piece of property, and normally that's always political. I've essentially stand here to represent the developer, which nobody typically likes. Everybody wants a place to live, but they really just don't want anybody to live around them, I guess. We call it last man in paradise syndrome. I've got mine, but now I don't want you to be anywhere near where I'm at. So in the initial phases, we have to go through a political process. We have to make presentations. We have to have hearings. We have zoning hearings. We have all kinds of considerations, environmental impact statements. We have to have 404 permits. We have to, which is Army Corps of Engineers relative to drainage, hydrology, just multitudes of conditions that have to occur before we can even initiate a building project. And that might take some time. That's, we think it would take 2 years to bring a new project on stream from scratch, from inception. Now I don't think there are any building projects in process right now. Is that true? I don't think there are any new land development projects in our area. So the method I use to organize these things is called the critical path. And I want to just talk a little bit about as it might apply to Nawapa. It was proposed to me. He said, well, Wayne, Nick brought it to my attention. He said, well, Wayne, if you're going to build Nawapa, how would you go about it? First, we just have to believe that it's doable. And then we start to break it down into its component parts. Now you can kind of see this is a little example of a critical process map over here, and it's not just a scheduling map. It really works out to be an analytical tool. What we're really trying to identify is in any activity or project, there are X amount of things to be done. So in the case of Nawapa, there are somewhere in the neighborhood, and I haven't personally counted them, but there have been others that have said 339 to 368 separate major building construction projects. And they break down into systems. There are three primary systems. We have a collection system, we have the transfer system, and the distribution system. So I start to break it down into its component parts. It's kind of like, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. You got to break it up into parts. So we break those parts into categories, and this may seem elementary, but I was asked how I would go about it, so I see it in my frame of reference. And those categories are dams, reservoirs, hydroelectric power plants, tunnels, pumping systems, nuclear power plants, aqueducts, pipelines, and canals. So we've got categories. Now, in this kind of a system, if we're talking about systems and processes, we need to determine the component that has the longest duration or the longest time for construction. And we also need to prioritize components, so it's relatively simple. In this case, we would say, well, we need to first collect the water before we can transfer the water, before we can distribute the water. I suspect that there are possibilities for bringing this project online more in phases. I suspect it could come online, whereas there could be benefits realized or water distributed before the entire project is built. I think the thing that kind of makes it abstract is, well, you got to build this whole thing. It's going to take 30 years, and then we're going to flip the switch and here we go. Well, to give you some kind of a sense of that, someone made a calculation. I don't remember who it was, but if we did it that way, and that's just really elementary, but it would take 6 months. If we turned the water loose at the top, it would take 6 months to get to the bottom. So, how long did it take to fill, the Lake Powell, for example? I don't remember, but I think it took something like 10 to 15 years just for the thing to collect, its relative amount of water. Now we have engineers and hydrologists here, and that all needs to be determined. It's a strategic approach. We have an urgency here, and we need to bring this thing online. So there's a facet of CPM, or critical path processing, that we call fast track. So how could we fast track this project? How could we put as many people to work as quickly as possible? And that's what I kind of tried to take a look at. But in addition to that, we would like to have the benefits as quickly as possible, or we'd like to start having benefits, not just, and certainly, employment benefits and other, even the sense of a national mission. If we could get a shift into construction, into building this project, I think we'd make a major shift in just complete attitude across the nation. So what we need to do when we work with critical path and fast track is we try to concentrate effort. We try to work strategically. And so I'm going to make some proposals, and they're arguable, no doubt. I'm not delusional about this project. It needs much analysis. It needs a lot of consideration. But I suspect that if we had the proper conditions in place, and even with that, there's a critical path. There'd be a critical path in front of us, but I've designed this as if the conditions existed, that we could initiate. We were prepared. We could pull the trigger and say, go. So, and I'll march through these things here. You can kind of see what's going on over there, but we layer things up. I suspect that if we were able to get the shift in the political side of the equation, which there is a critical path that's been identified, So a critical path is there's X amount of activities. They have to be done. Somebody's got to do them. So you have to assign that or identify who's going to do that. They have to be done in a sequence. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and according to a time frame. We're always looking for the goal. We're trying to hit a certain point. So if we looked at the critical path that precedes the construction, which is the true critical path right now, we need to consider that there would need to be Obama out, Glass-Steagall in. We'd need a shift in. We'd need to shake out the banking system and reestablish a credit system. So then we'd have the circumstances available to start. So that's a critical path. That's a very critical path. If that path doesn't, then the rest of it's kind of moot. But let's say that might happen. And if we started at the left hand of the chart, the first thing we would do is establish a management team. I took a wild stab at who might be on that team. The Department of Reclamation would be there, and probably a whole host of experts in the world. The management team. So you have to have people who do what my job would be, to start to organize this whole thing into a system. Then you need a control base. You can see as we kind of look down through there, we need a massive system of hardwares and softwares, which is available. That stuff's all available to us right now. And the people who can program it or reorganize it or reprogram it. We'd have a financing and accounting system, and a contract administration would all be in one place. If we had that established, then we can pull the trigger. Then we can say, we need the data to start to really strategically determine areas or feed the design processes. We could immediately start to hire the design teams. We have, if you look across it, we just came down from top to bottom. We know that we're going to need materials, so we would have to start to look into how we would supply this project, and the primary components would be cement plants and steel mills, and start to determine how you would get that there. Machinery production, construction machines would have to be considered. Now I suspect I know for a fact, coming across from Phoenix, we came past about 40 acres of called heavy iron just sitting there rusting. So I suspect that there's quite a lot of that around the country, but even so, there would be more of that to be considered. Transportation machines, transportation lines. We could start to initiate that sort of thing. The national supply lines, again, the railways, conventional railways. All these things that have to start to be geared up, maglev systems. So just to initiate that, there would be, I would suspect, tens of thousands of jobs to start the planning process. So we have to feed those people with data. So we have to get them out into the physical field and start to do the geologicals and the hydrological studies. A lot of that's already been done. That's the good news. Surveys, geotechnical considerations, borings. Even though we would need to throw off the shackles of the EPA, essentially, or adjust that, there still needs to be conscious environmental consideration towards the construction process. There are good and proper reasons to analyze environmental considerations for the construction of the process, or the construction process. Now you see the line going down through the center here. Of course, we can't build anything unless we acquire the land. We presume that the treaties would have been in place. A lot of it, with Canada, and there's some pre-considerations there. I don't know that that's a deal breaker. Then we need to have access to it, and we need to be able to establish the locations where the construction people would reside while in the process of construction. And of course, down through the bottom here, we've got these different divisions. So we have structural design teams that would be working on the dams, tunnels, and aqueducts. I'd want all that work done as quickly as possible. We might not get to building all of those things. Obviously, we're not going to start 350 projects all at once. We'll, through this CPM analytical process, we'll start to identify strategically which one can be started, what area can we start to address. Certainly, it may be that due to the duration of some of these things that you may have several hundred of these projects under construction at one time. But they would be done in a sequence. Obviously, it's not necessary to build the aqueduct in Mexico right away. We wouldn't start with that. Start with the collection system. So that gives you kind of a little bit of an overview to it. I think, I could spend quite a lot more time on that, but given the circumstances, I think I'll just wrap that up. I just touch on that. But I absolutely believe that, or I'm unaware of any other solution. I've spent the last 3 years since the crash of the system, or our area of that system, studying. About the time I picked up with LaRouche and started to really look into the subject of physical economics. And I don't know of any other solution. I'm just unaware. It's not like we have 10 of them on the table right now. We'll just pick. This will do it. This will solve the problem. It will solve all the problems and go far and away beyond solving all of the problems that we're faced with right now. And I absolutely believe we could initiate it very quickly if we can follow the critical path on the front end of this process. So I encourage you. One other thing I wanted to do is to tell you really quickly is that we all got thanked over at the restaurant, but truly I'd like to thank all of the LaRouche youth movement people and LaRouche PAC for taking up the leadership of this task, essentially. Certainly they're concerned for their own futures, but I don't see anybody else doing that. And they have the energy. They're the generation that can pull it off. But we can consult and we can try to support and do those things. So and if anybody else has a better idea, we'd sure like to hear it. But I just haven't heard one. So with that, I guess I'd just like to close with one thought, and I believe it was George Santayana that said, all it takes for the forces of evil to rule the world is for enough good men to do nothing. So I think that under the circumstances, and that's the primary reason why I'm here, is that we're going to have to rise up out of the ranks and drive this thing forward. So if you haven't already made a contribution or joined LaRouche PAC, the only way we're going to get this done is to press it forward. So I would encourage you to.